In this video, I'm gonna show you how to install a proper i3 setup on your Ubuntu-based system like Linux Mint, but also Debian-based system. This is a quick start guide here from Linuxort. My name is Jean, and we are gonna using debian-z for our i3 setup. This is a Debian minimal setup with i3, but you could also use it on Linux Mint or Ubuntu. I show it today how to install everything proper and how to get right started with a very different desktop experience where you control your desktop only via key bindings and you don't use the mouse anymore for anything regarding the desktop control, switching windows, closing windows, and so on. I open up a terminal here and then we head just right into the installation. For that, we issue the first command, sudo apt install git and vim. We need these both for configuration, but also for downloading our files we need. As a next step, we copy the git clone command here and paste it in here on the right side. For that, we have to be in our home folder directly because otherwise the install scripts won't work. So I just press enter here and the repository which we are looking on here is now downloaded. Afterwards, we change our directory into this repository, which we now cloned into our computer. And here we see we are in our debian-z folder. So now we could adjust some things if we want, but we are gonna doing the very quick start guide. It's completely fine what the scripts are doing. They are installing Brave browser, also VS Codium, and maybe if you're doing it on Debian, then also Telegram desktop, but this won't work here on Ubuntu and Linux Mint, so this is completely fine for now. So I just run this script here, run me.sh, and if we have done everything right, then all commands are issued automatically, and this is also now run by Nala. Very nice to see, and this takes a bit time, about 10 minutes I would say. After some time, the script has finished, and there were small errors around the log here, but this is completely fine for us because the errors happened are not breaking anything we are gonna using. So this is it for our script, and afterwards we have to install some other things. And what we have to issue before our reboot is the command sudo apt install alacritty, because this doesn't work on every system. On some systems alacritty is installed afterwards. On this system I have here, alacritty wasn't installed. That's the new terminal we are gonna use in i3, so just make sure afterwards with sudo apt install alacritty that this has been installed. We reboot our computer and have a look at our login screen, because there we can now change between Cinnamon and i3, for example. So I type in reboot. In our login screen, we see our login. And before we can type in our password, we could now change the desktop environment. And here I'm switching to i3 desktop. Afterwards, I can now type in my password, and here we are in our i3 environment, as you see. At first, I have prepared a cheat sheet for you. Here I have it. I put you the download link into the video description where you can print out, or you can just take a photo of it, or just do whatever you want with it. I'm referring to these key bindings, but I'm also now telling you which keys I'm pressing to get around in this desktop, because we shouldn't do anything with our mouse. We could, here we have our workspaces. This is I would say an essential feature of i3. At first, we have to do some things or finish some things in our setup. And for that, I'm opening a terminal. It is very easy under i3 opening a terminal. You could press super or the Windows key and enter. This is for our terminal here. At first, we see our alacritty migrate command, which we have to issue because, this is an old YAML config and they don't want any YAML files in the future. So what we have to do here is alacritty migrate. I press enter, and then we see successfully migrated. Also, we need to install some further software because not every software has been installed, because this is originally a Debian setup, but we are issuing it here on Linux Mint or Ubuntu like systems. So what we have to issue here is sudo apt install EZA and neovim. I type enter again and type my password and type enter again. Afterwards, this should be now installed. EZA we need for our ls command, because if I now type in ls, we see a very nice ls inside here. This looks quite right now. Also, if we open up the file manager of i3, or we have configured here in i3, then neovim will be an essential part of this if we want to edit any text file. But we will do this very, very soon. Let's now close this window here. You could very easily close this window by pressing Windows and Q, and here we are back at our very blank screen here. At the next point of time, let's have a look at this important message. This says us, okay, press Super Shift H to view the guide. So I would say let's just do this. Super Shift H. Super is always the Windows key, and here we are, and you can see a very easy introduction to this desktop. Very nice. And you see some information about the desktop and about the setup. This could be very handy into the future. And we see also somewhere the option to disable this important message, of course. And I would say we will do this. I press Windows Q to close this again, and then let us open up our config. There we have different methods of doing it. Let's do it away with our file manager, because as a file manager we are using Ranger now. I press Windows R to open up our Ranger. This is also a file manager. This has a different usage if you didn't use any terminal file manager before, like Ranger, for example. And navigating here is kind of different. You do this with your arrow keys, and then we have to open up our config folder. How to open up a folder? Just press the right arrow key, and then we are in here, and then I'm going to i3 here, and then I want the config, so I press the right key again because I want to go into our i3 desktop, and here we see a preview of all files, and what I need to open, or what I want to open now, is the config file. And that's very easy. Press just the right arrow key again, and then we have now neovim open, where we can now replace and change some settings. At first, let's go to line 10 here, exec no startup ID. I don't want this startup help notification we had here in the right top corner to be displayed again. So I press I for the insert mode, and then press the hash key. And then I go down a bit, and here we have our variables for our borders. Because as we see it here, let's just open up another terminal here by pressing Windows and enter. Then you see, we have some space between the windows. I personally don't like any space between these windows, so I personally set these variables to 0, but you could leave it like it is. I don't just want any borders around them. For me, wasted space. If you want to use it, then of course that's completely fine. Also, now go downwards. Because I'm using Linux Mint or an Ubuntu based system, I have other commands to reboot or shut down the computer. Very easy. I remove the sudo reboot here and type in systemctl reboot instead, without any sudo. And here in my second line here with power off, I type in instead systemctl power off. And this is now fine. These were the settings I wanted to change, and this now looks kind of good in my opinion. So I press escape and then colon W Q and then enter, and then we have saved our config. Now I want to reload the config. How are we gonna do that? I press Shift, Super, or the Windows key, and R, and then we restart our i3 gaps window manager here. Yeah, we are not using the gaps for this, but yeah, of course you could use it. And there are also some hotkeys in the cheat sheet where you can change or adjust the key bindings by pressing Super X, for example. Then we have the outer gaps here, and by Super Z, for example, we also can adjust the inner gaps. But I don't want to do this, so just press Windows Shift Z and Windows Shift X, and then this is completely fine. So here we are in our very basic i3 setup. Let's just handle some things here. Our default web browser is Brave. We could open our default web browser very easily by pressing the Windows and W key. And then if everything is right, then we see perfect. Here's our Brave web browser. Also, if we want to open a code editor, for example, we could press Windows C. This opens up Visual Studio Codium. This is the open source version of Visual Studio Code. And we are now on a different workspace as we see it here. Please don't use the mouse, just use the hotkeys. How to navigate between the workspaces very easily, just press the Windows key and the number you want to go to the workspace. For example, if I press Windows 1, then I'm on the first workspace. If I press Windows 2, then I'm on the second workspace, Windows 3 on the third one, and so on. If we want to move a window, for example, this window, Visual Studio Codium, to another workspace, we press Windows Shift and then the number where we want to move to, for example, to the second workspace. So I press Windows Shift 2, and then this is now at the second workspace. So I type Windows 2 afterwards to go to the actual workspace here. And yeah, now we moved it to the 2. We could also move it to the 1 workspace here by pressing Windows Shift 1, of course. And then we are going back to our first workspace. And here we see this is splitted automatically, very, very easy. There are some other things we could do with i3 here. For example, we could change the layout here, for example, to a tabbed layout. I'm a very big fan of the tabbed layout on i3. We could do it here at this desktop with Alt, Shift, and then T for tabbed. And then we have just small tabs here where we can move between them by just pressing with the mouse or by pressing Windows and then right or the left arrow key to go around here. If we want to move the Brave tab to the right side, then we can press Windows Shift with the right arrow key, and then we moved it to the right. And if I press Alt Shift E, then we are back to the splitted mode here. And of course we could here also change the arrangement of the windows by, for example, I now have focused my Brave window here, and if I press Shift, Windows and the left arrow key, yeah, then we change the position to the left one, or just the right arrow key with Shift and Windows pressed to move it a bit around. But maybe we also want to adjust the size between these two windows, and this we could do with Super and Control, and then we Super and Control, and then you could you can press the left arrow key, for example, or the right arrow key. So there is how you could change the appearance. And now we are getting very advanced here in i3. What if we want to make a half of this window again? Of course, we could just press Windows and Enter, for example, to get a third terminal here. Okay, very nice. But I want this terminal not on the right side next to VS Codium. I want it at the downside of VS Codium, but also on the right side of Brave. So what I'm doing is close this window again. We could also do it with an open window, but I just want to close it here now. So what I want to do is to focus this window here, and then we are getting a new shortcut here by pressing Super V, and this changes this right thing here to an vertical split container. And if I now press Windows and enter again, then the new window is opened up on the bottom of Visual Studio Code, but also to the right of Brave. Very, very cool. This is because we splitted this current container by pressing Super V. Of course, we could now also rearrange our windows. For example, if I want this terminal on the left side and Brave on the downside, I press just Shift Windows and the left arrow key, and this moved it to the mid side here. Maybe I could press Windows Shift left arrow key again, and then I press Windows right just to focus this Brave window here, and then I press Windows Shift arrow key right, and then because i3 is still aware that there's a vertical split container, we just now change the position between these two windows. I hope you are understanding it. Of course, I personally would say that such a window setup you are not doing too often. Normally, I'm only having a split setup, for example, or a tabbed setup by pressing the Alt Shift T by key binding here, and then I'm switching between these windows. And I also use the workspaces very intensively. We could change up to the 10th workspace here via hotkey. Very, very easy. So this is also a thing you could use here. But I'm closing now all windows. And one thing I want to show you in the end, there are some default behaviors for some windows. For example, if I'm on the 5th workspace and I now want to open up the Brave browser, or let's open up the Visual Studio Code again by pressing Windows C, then Visual Studio Code is moved to workspace 3 immediately, because this is hard-coded. Also, if you open up our Brave browser, then this is opened up at the first workspace we see here. And I personally don't want this hard coding, but maybe you want to change this hard coding. Maybe you also want to change some hotkeys and some default behavior or some default browser, for example, and so on. And I'm now showing you how to do this. I press Windows Q to quit this web browser. I go to the 3rd workspace and press Windows Q again to quit also the VS Code app. And then we could press Alt C, and this is a config file manager very easily. And I want to get to the i3 workspaces settings. This is also in the .config i3 folder, of course. But yeah, this is a very quick way we have here in this desktop. So I press i3 workspaces, and here we are in our i3 workspaces. There are some default settings and some default behavior. We have 11 workspaces here defined, and to get to the 11th workspace, they are using the Windows and F12 key. Okay, that's also fine, but honestly, I don't recommend you using more than 10 workspaces. But this 11th workspace has a special meaning because it is meant to be the workspace for some other outputs you see here. So for the second screen, for example, this could be fine. I personally have 3 monitors, and I have adjusted some workspaces to the first, some workspaces to the middle, and some workspaces to the last monitor. But I'm showing you my setup, my i3 setup, in a short amount of time to just give more input and more ideas what you could do with i3 and how you could configure it, because that is one of the hardest parts, I would say, of i3. Because if you install i3 without any scripts, then i3 is very naked, and I have done it from the naked perspective, and that's very hard, and my desktop isn't still anything of perfect. But yeah, I'm using it for a small amount of time just to get around it, and maybe I'm faster with i3 in the end. but I'm also doing another video about this if I finished my testing with i3 completely. But here in the very bottom side, we have now our assignments. So all Brave browsers are assigned to the first workspace, all PC-man FMs are assigned to the second workspace, all Codiums to the third workspace, and so on. You could do such things, but I personally don't want to do this, so we are about to comment these out. Also, the focus thing we don't need anymore with our assignment here. So what I'm doing is pressing Ctrl V to get into the visual block mode, and then press the arrow down key here that we selected everything here, and then I press Shift I and then the hash key and then escape, and then afterwards we see, okay, now we have inserted a hash key here on every line. Of course, you could also do it manually, and this is just a quick hint we have here with Vim or neovim at this case. So this is it for our config file here. I am deleting the assignments here. Of course, you could change the assignments here also. You could add some more assignments, but I don't need these assignments for myself. But of course, you could define it in another way. And then I'm pressing escape, WQ, enter, and then we have to reload our i3. We could do this again by pressing Shift, Super, and R, and then we see, okay, i3 has been restarted. And then if I open now up Windows C, so our Visual Studio Codium, we see, okay, we stay on our first workspace I selected here, and this is great. Also, if I go to the fourth workspace and press and open up Brave browser, that is also fine. So if you want to change some key bindings and also some hot start applications, just press Alt-C again, and then we see, for example, i3 config here. I open up i3 config, and here you see all variables and of course all key bindings which are set here. For example, if we want to change our web browser, we go to the browser setting here, and then we could remove Brave browser here and exchange it with Firefox or Chromium or the browser you want, for example. Other hotkeys are found by pressing Alt-C, and we are going to this SXHKD setting here, and then you see all other hotkeys we have here. For example, yeah, there are also some settings for Discord, PC-man FM, GitHub desktop, Brave browser also inside here, also Codium, for example, Telegram desktop, and so on. Some applications are not pre-installed, but of course here you can now define some other key bindings, and here you can change everything you want to do. So I press colon Q to exit this because I didn't change anything here, but I just wanted to show you. This is it. Just to get a normal application launcher, you could press Windows and P, then we have our menu. So for example, I can now open up Linux Assistant, for example, perfect, but I could also open up some other applications I installed, like Firefox and everything you are missing or you want to open, LibreOffice and so on. Very nice, very neat settings. There are also some other very cool things, for example, switching between all windows and searching through all windows. I'm not doing this in any way. I'm doing many things with workspaces, and in the end I also want to show you my setup of i3. So I go out of the virtual machine and go into a blank desktop here, and as you see, my i3 is not as configured as I showed it to you in this video, because I'm only having a very bare minimum setup. I didn't theme anything. If I want to open an application, I press Shift D in my case, and then I have a very simple menu here. If I open up, for example, Linux Assistant, then kind of this one. Okay, not the best one, but I'm getting around here. But the interesting things I have changed is how I laid out my workspaces. I personally have 3 monitors, and if I open up a-rund-r, it's a great small program if you haven't installed it and you have to change your monitor layout, then a-rund-r is your setting. Then you see your configuration. We have our left screen, our middle screen, and our right screen, and we also see how they are called. And if I close this one now, and if I open up my config in i3, I just make it a bit bigger here. Then I also have my workspaces configured here. For example, my first 3 workspaces are on the left screen, my 4 workspaces are on the middle screen, and the last 3 workspaces are on the right screen. So I have kind of a splitted workspace setup, and this works actually very, very nice with my workflow. Also, of course, I did some hotkeys here. You don't need the other tool. You could also just configure them in the i3 config here again. And also in the end, what I'm doing is some auto start applications. So let me show this to you. Here we are. I do an i3 message command and then define the workspace number and then exec Thunderbird, for example, here. Then I'm sleeping 1 second just to give it a bit time to start up, and then the element desktop, and then the Linux assistant, and then after some other second KeyPass XC, then Bitwarden, for example, and also Nextcloud. They are on my 3rd screen. Also Flameshot, and then in the end I have Spotify on my 10th workspace. So I adjusted some rules also for mine, but they are not hard-coded in any way, like in the setup we had before, where we disabled these hard-coded setups. But yeah, this is how I did it here. Of course, you could define a similar auto start in our i3 setup I showed you. I press Windows R to open up my Ranger here, and inside Ranger I opening up the .config folder, and then I'm going to i3, and then we have our autostart.sh. So I press the right arrow key again, and then you could also define some autostart applications you want to enable. For example, numlock X on is a very good auto start setting. This is it for this video. If you found this video helpful, please leave a like and subscribe to this YouTube channel, because every week we are releasing new stuff about Linux and open source software. And my personal opinion about i3 is it's a great piece of software. Of course, we have a successor in terms of Wayland. This is called Sway. It is kind of a one-to-one implementation in the usage, but yeah, it's just working with Wayland. But my problem with i3 and others is that it is very powerful with all the hotkeys, but you have to set up a lot just to get it working, and this isn't a very good approach in my opinion. So what do you think about an own distribution which only focuses on maximal productivity, comes with a very nice setup, Sway or i3 setup, but also, for example, with a very good file manager, also, for example, a terminal email client like Mutt? What are you thinking about that? Is there anything like this already existing? Just write it in the comments, because I didn't find anything, and this would be a very cool project, I think. But just write it down into the comments. This was it for today. So stay tuned, have fun using i3 or your normal Linux desktop, and see you next time. Bye bye.